Go sit. No, I sit over here. Okay, I'll check on Welcome to my world.
Right.
I'm supporting the paper industry. One case.
There we go.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. For sure, the record, banker box.
All right, good evening, everyone. This is the City of Garden City Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. It is Wednesday, March 26, 2025 at 6:30. We'll go ahead and confirm audio and visual. Ms. Thornborough, are we all set with audio?
Chairman, yes, that's been confirmed. Thank
All
you.
right, thank you very much. And we will now call the meeting to order. For the record, we have Commissioners Smith, Wilde, Brown, and Shepard present, and we will go ahead and stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Right. So staff, I did talk to Ms. Thornborough about changing the agenda. For the sake of the meeting, I was thinking that we could change the work session to after the action items. Is there any objection to making that change from anybody?
No.
All right, seeing none, then we'll go ahead and make that change to the agenda. Otherwise, we'll go ahead and move on to the consent agenda. This commission provides for a public hearing for quasi judicial administrative land use decisions, appeals, and legislative actions specific to land use regulations. The format for the public hearing will follow the procedures of presentation by the applicant, city staff report, public testimony, rebuttal testimony from the applicant, discussion of hearing among the commission, and then decision. If there is anybody from the public who wishes to give testimony, there are some rules. No person shall be permitted to speak at the public hearing until the person is recognized by the chair to do so. The commission will not address those who speak out of order. If you have questions, you may ask them during your turn for public testimony, and the applicant can respond to them during the rebuttal, or the commission can ask the question of staff during the discussion. There are sign-up sheets at the front. If you wish to give public testimony, please sign up. No person shall be permitted to testify at the public hearing unless such person has signed their full name and written their residential address on the sign-up sheets. Clearly state your name and address into the microphone at the podium. The consent agenda includes item of business which may not require separate discussion. From time to time, we may move an item to the consent agenda. Following the addition of any items to the consent agenda, we will vote on the remaining items in one motion. At this time, it looks like there may be two items that could move to the consent agenda. Those items being CUP FY 2025-007, the conditional use permit for AZN pet grooming, and then also SUB FY 2025-001, River Villas subdivision. So the first item being CUP FY 2025-007, conditional use permit, Teresa Schneider with AZN Pet Grooming is requesting a conditional use for an animal care facility at 5443 North Glenwood Street, Unit 5455, located in the C2 Commercial Zoning District. Is there anybody from the public that is here to testify on this matter? Seeing none, is the applicant present? Would you please stand up and state your name?
Schneider.
Thank you. Have you had the opportunity to read the decision document and all of the conditions of approval?
Yes.
Thank you. Do you agree to all the conditions of approval?
Yes.
All right. Staff, are there any items for the commission that you would like to discuss or reasons we should not move this item to the consent agenda? Okay, commissioners, are there any items or comments that you have regarding this matter that you would need to discuss or would like to keep from this item being moved to consent?
Works for me.
All right, thank you. Then we will plan on moving your item to the consent agenda. Thank you very much. You can sit down. Second item, SUB FY 2025-001, River Villas subdivision, preliminary plat processed as a planned unit development. Connor Lindstrom is requesting a 15 residential lot subdivision with one common lot. The property is located at 606 East 43rd Street, Ada County, in the R3 zoning district. Is there anybody from the public that is here to testify on this matter? All right, seeing no one from the public to testify, is the applicant present? Would you please stand up, please, and state your name for the record?
Stephanie Hawkins, 575 Discovery Way in Quincy.
Thank you very much. And have you had an opportunity to read the decision document and all of the conditions of approval? Okay. Do you agree to all the conditions of the approval? Okay, thank you very much. Staff, are there any items for the commission that you would like to discuss or reason not to move this to the consent?
None by staff.
Thank you very much. Commissioners, any comments or questions regarding this item? For any reason you would like to see this in a discussion as opposed to consent?
Not me.
No.
All right, thank you very much. Then we will go ahead and move this item to the consent agenda as well. Thank you very much. In addition to those two items that will be moved to the consent, we do have item A, which is approval of the minutes from February 19, 2025. We have item B, SUB FY 2024-0006, the Edgemere Subdivision. This is a combined preliminary plat and final plat processed as a plan unit development. This is to be continued from February 19th, 2025, moved to April 16th, 2025. Item number C, CUP FY 2025-003, conditional use permit. Stefan Pendl and Strive Academy LLC is requesting conditional use for the expansion of the daycare facility located at 8707 West State Street. This is continued from February 19th, 2025, moved to April 16th, 2025 due to noticing errors. So that will make up the consent agenda. Are there any other items for discussion? Hearing no other items for discussion, I will entertain a motion.
Mr. Chair,
Commissioner Wilde,
I'll move approval of the consent agenda to consist of items A, B, and C on the consent agenda. That's the minutes and SUB FY 24-6 Edgemere and CUP FY 25-3 Strive Academy. To include also items of new business under topic 6, CUP FY 2025-7 and SUB FY 2025-1 River Villas.
thank you, Commissioner Wilde. I have a motion from Commissioner Wilde. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a second from Commissioner Smith. Any further deliberation? All right, if not, then we will go ahead and put this to vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any noes? No noes, the ayes have it. Thank you very much. That will conclude the consent agenda. Thank you very much for coming in. You're welcome to stay if you'd like. Okay. All right, so at this point, we'll go ahead and move on to new business. Beginning the public hearing on the action item A, CUP FY 2025-006. Conditional use permit. Eric Hagan is requesting an industry flex use located at 4410 Osage Street in the C2 General Commercial Zoning District. Looks like we have the applicant here. Is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you, sir. So again, for the public hearing, we will have the brief introduction by you. If you would remember to please state your name and address for the record. and there'll be a presentation by the staff. And then the public hearing, rebuttal testimony from the applicant. We'll close the public hearing, have a discussion amongst the commission, and then render our decision. So thank you, sir.
We also have the property owner online.
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, thank you very much. And if you could state your name and address for the record as well, if you're going to be speaking, that would be.
Yeah. This is Stacy Seacrest, and I'm at 599 Camino El Dorado in Encinitas, California.
Thank you.
Is there some way to get the PDF viewer to stay up? The PDF.
It's not part of the record yet, though.
No.
Right.
We're on here. All right.
That work?
Yep, I got a way around it.
Okay.
All right. And for the record, my name is Eric Hagan. My address is 280 North 8th Street, Suite 204, Boise, Idaho 83702. And we'll start with the property owner, Stacy Seacrest.
Yeah. Hi, thank you for hearing this. And first, I just wanted to thank your staff. The staff at the City of Garden City has been super helpful and kind. Even when I don't always like the regulations, they're really wonderful. So thank you. So I wanted to give you a little background. I've owned the property a little over 2 years. I've made a lot of repairs and improvement over the last 2 years. Most of it is not obvious from the street, starting with just removing car parts, trash, trimming trees and brush, put up a retaining wall behind one of the buildings where the irrigation ditch was wearing away the foundation, installed new irrigation and sod in the front, repaired and replaced some roofs and rain gutters, installed new insulation inside some of the buildings, added new plumbing from the street, upgraded the electrical, took out all the old wiring from the 70s and 80s, installed new LED lighting in most of the buildings, updated the addressing, demolished the 2 houses in front that were not habitable. And the main tenant in the building had a dyno room in the back of the building, which I think most of the other tenants and the neighbors could hear. I asked them to either insulate the dyno room or remove it, and they decided to move out. So we've had this space available. The city recommended that the Industry Flex might be a better option than the Auto Cup that is currently on the property. And I think it's moving the property in the right direction, away from auto repair towards something that's a little more neighborhood friendly and quieter. So that's kind of where we are at this point. I've spent almost $150,000 on repairs on the property since I purchased it.
Thank you, Stacy.
Yeah.
I would like to reiterate what she said. Good evening, commissioners and staff. The work the staff do here is almost a thankless job. You have to deal with people like us asking a million questions of it. So, like Stacy said, the previous occupant of the space in question, which is this space right here, was ThrottleWorks Automotive. They had a dyno room, which is where they test the engines. You can just imagine an engine running at 10,000 RPMs all day, every day. It was pretty loud. They had the whole facility. When they moved out, Steel Automotive moved into one half, and this other half has been vacant since then. So Ms. Seacrest would like to improve upon the tenancy, as she noted, by allowing the currently vacant space to be available for multiple uses. And this would go for all the other spaces on the property. And she currently has a lease with a company that's already in Garden City, just a block away, called PVC Spiral, and they need more storage space because they shut down their facility in Florida and moved them all up here. So they're going to be storing a lot of products in here. They're also going to be selling them to I think wholesale or retail. Now, the existing property has multiple different uses and tenants on it. Most of them are auto service related, which is what the current conditional use permit allows on there. We do have Foothills Granite, which is a building materials sales center. They sell their granite there for countertops and whatnot. So as we were going through this process, Stacy just wanted to move in a new tenant. And obviously it was a conditional use, so we had to go through this process to get that in there. And so along with the conditional use permit comes a lot of other work. And one of those things is the site landscape upgrade. So we are proposing to add, to meet the code requirements, 3 type 1 or class 1 trees on the south side along 44th, 1 class 2. There's already 3, 4, those should be class 2 as well. Those are all honey locusts, and these are flowering pears. So we would be going for a total, it's about a 300-foot long stretch. So that means for the code, you need to have 1 class 1 tree every 50 feet and 1 class 2 tree for frontage. So that's 6 class 1 trees and 1 class 2 tree, total of 7 trees all along the frontage. So as you can see, we have more than 7 along the frontage. And then likewise along Osage, the previous conditional use permit had installed 4 flowering pear trees along here already, and 1 right here. We're proposing to add 2 new class 2 trees to get to the total of 7. And just to kind of give you an idea, whoops, wrong way, of the types of trees we're looking at. So straight from the Treasure Valley Tree Selection Guide, this is a dwarf flowering pear. This is a class 1 tree, so it's a shorter tree. This is a flowering pear, which is a class 2 tree. Both of them come with this exclamation point, which basically says it has a note of concern because of pests and invasiveness and is overly planted. So, and likewise for the honey locust trees that are there, they're big water consumers, and there's better options out there for trees. So we would like to be able to propose a couple other different trees. Class 1 trees, so these would be the class 1s that have low water consumption, are good for the birds and the bees, and are good to put underneath power lines. And these are the 3 that we're looking at. We're not married to anyone at all, but we just wanted to make sure that we had that taken care of. The class 2 trees, in lieu of the honey locust, we would propose the tulip tree, hawthorn bean, or the common hackberry, all of which are low water usage trees, and one of which is actually also a flowering tree. And the reason for that is that it provides pollinators for the bees. So they're both very nice, friendly trees for the neighborhood and the environment. So as part of one of our comments that we had in our staff packet was we didn't provide a compliance statement. I provided a narrative and listed some code sections in there. I've since elaborated upon that. So these are the specific code sections that are being called out for the compliance statement. And we meet all of them with the exception of the conditional use, because the current use right now does not support storage. And that's kind of what we're looking at right now. So beyond that, the staff report had a couple recommendations. One of them was to move the rear fence and gate back. And let's go back real quick so I can show you where that is. Right back here. It's right along the property line, which we all know is not what the current zoning code likes to see. However, it was approved to be that way under a 2016 design review. And the previous owner met all the conditions of that approval
for the fence to flip the corrugated siding to the outside and to move the fence forward. So we would like to leave that one as is. The owner has some ideas to maybe paint it to make it look nicer, put some art on it or something like that. But we would like to keep it where it is because it acts as a visual barrier to the trash containers that are back there, as well as the users who are parking their trucks back there. The other statement or the other item in the staff report asked for all class 2 trees along the street frontages. And as I mentioned, the code says 1 class 1 for every 50 feet and then 1 class 2 or 3 per frontage. So as there's already a bunch of class 1 trees existing along both frontages, it would not behoove us to cut those down or to add all type 2 trees, although we love type 2 trees. They do grow up big and spread the shade pretty good, though they don't need to be every 50 feet. So as I mentioned, we're trying to go along the lines of what the code minimum is, the 1 class 1 tree per 50 feet and 1 class 2 tree per frontage. Just to give you a little bit of information about along the lines of what Stacy was saying about the cost. I have no idea how much she bought the property for, but it couldn't have been cheap. In the last 2 years, she spent about $150,000 in maintenance and upkeep, as she mentioned. The current lease that she has with PVC Spiral is for a 27-month lease at $6,500 a month. It's a pretty nice $175,000 there that she makes off of that. Like I mentioned, we went into this thinking we didn't have to do anything. We could just move the tenant in there. Now, what we're looking at here is about $41,000 worth of improvements to move in a $6,500 a month tenant. So as I mentioned, that's why we're kind of looking at this as the bare minimum of the code requirements and not having to do any more work than what we are proposing. And with that, I stand for any questions.
Thank you very much. And just after reading the staff report and the conditions, so it sounds like really there's only 2 items that you're looking for.
Yep.
And that's the fence and then the landscaping.
Yeah, she specified all type 2 trees. So we're just asking for that to be per code minimum.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for the applicant from the commission?
Mr. Chairman, I have a question. I understand the issue on the trees. But are we saying that we don't want to take down the chain link fence? Or that metal fence that's there, that's left over, and the basis is because of the cost? Is that what we're saying?
Yes, we're trying to limit cost as much as possible because this is a short-term tenant for one. Ms. Seacrest does want to do improvements over the years, like add a building we have down here in the corner. We're proposing a building pad for a new building in there. And a lot of that will have to do with also with the fencing. She just doesn't want to have to do it all right now. She wants to do it as other tenants come in and occupy the space. Does that answer your question?
That prompts another question, but I will ask it when we get to the rebuttal portion.
Okay.
Commissioner Brown, any other questions? All right, thank you, sir. I appreciate it. Bill?
Good afternoon, for evening, Chairman and Commissioners. This is conditional use permit fiscal year 2025-0006. It is located at 4410 North Osage Street. However, there has been a lot of different addressing associated with this property, which has also led to multiple conditional use permits, design reviews, and occupancy permits for different tenants of this or these buildings in this property. The applicant is requesting the use of industry flex, and it's to apply to the whole property and not just a specific tenant space. And this was based off of previous discussions with staff in an attempt to help expedite or streamline the permitting processes, as well as clean up the active or expired permits on site The use of industry flex in and of itself is what I like to call an umbrella use or umbrella term, because it allows for more uses within it or underneath it under the umbrella, such as vehicle services, a storage yard, and light industry, to operate on a single parcel that is multi-tenant in or has a multi-tenant structure or in function. The use of light industry does conflict with the C2 zoning district's intent, despite being an allowed use within the industry flex definition. The Garden City Code 82B states that activities that are more compatible with mixed use or residential uses that are minimally disruptive to the neighborhood should be located in the C2 zoning district. The reason why I bring this up of the light industry use within that light or industry flex is that Garden City Code 82C24 for industry flex and light industry states that all mechanical equipment emissions, shipping and or delivery, or other outdoor activity areas shall be located a minimum of 500 feet from the abutting residential district. So not use, but district. So the property that is directly adjacent to this property, I don't think we're sharing my screen. Let me share the screen real quick. Okay, so the property to the, I'll call it the north, or on the screen, it's to the right, is a residentially zoned property. It is zoned R3, which is considered the medium density residential zoning district. And there's approximately only about 10 feet between the existing structure and the property line adjacent to that residential district. So that there's about a 10-foot setback between the structure and that property line. As such, there might be conflict between the type of uses allowed within the industry flex use and the tenants that move into the site. And it conflicts with the purpose of the C2 zoning district, in that it could impact the residential uses adjacent to it. That being said, the code does not define the term outdoor activity, leaving room for discussion and interpretation by this commission. There does not appear to be a designated area for shipping and delivery on this site plan. And the site plan also does not identify any location where mechanical equipment is to be placed. This is not an uncommon issue when discussing industry flex uses and this definition of outdoor activity. The most recent application prior to this was Conditional Use Permit fiscal year 2023-0008, where the applicant was proposing industry flex, and it was also adjacent to a residential zoning district. And at the time, the commission restricted the industry flex use to prohibit the use of light industry, determining that the light industry use was too intense for that neighborhood and that property specifically. So that's just an example of how this has been handled in the past. A condition has been drafted for this application to require that all outdoor activities such as shipping and delivery and the mechanical equipment emissions be at least 500 feet from the residential zoning district. To put that into perspective, it would be about in the middle of Chinden to reach that 500 feet and be compliant with code. But that verbiage of that condition is taken directly from code. So the commission does have the ability to edit that condition of approval. There are additional conditions of approval related to the existing chain link fencing on the property, as well as the existing sheet metal fencing and gate along the Osage Street, which per Garden City Code 84A3 may remain unless otherwise required as part of a conditional use permit application. There is a previous conditional use permit on this property, which did require that the back portion of the property was screened by a privacy fence. And that's related to the design review approval that the applicant mentioned earlier in tonight's discussion. So as you can tell, there's a lot of layers to this of what was previously approved and passed at that time, but code does say it can remain unless otherwise required as part of the commission's approval here tonight. There are also conditions regarding the landscaping, which requires the minimum amount of what code calls for. It is typical for staff to draft a class 2 or class 3 street tree requirement as opposed to the class 1 that code calls out, because the class 1 doesn't usually meet the intent of what code is trying to get at, which is the tree canopy and environmental benefits and shade, drainage, etc. That goes into the bigger class trees as opposed to the class 1 trees. So that condition's drafted to require class 2 or 3, but code says class 1. And then while performing this review, staff found several tenants operating on the site without occupancy permits. So as such, a condition of approval is that all businesses within the site operating will need to obtain a proper occupancy permit, whether that's a building permit or occupancy analysis or environmental. They'll work with staff to figure out what permit they do need in order to legally occupy that space. Without that permit in place, there is a big concern about the life and health safety of those businesses and anyone entering those tenant spaces. So that is another condition of approval. So with that, I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Veal. Any questions for staff?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Brown?
I have a question for Hannah.
Sir.
Mr. Chairman, Hannah, do you have a pointer?
I have my clicker.
Would you,
mouse.
for all of us here,
Yeah.
show on this drawing where the I have to make sure I describe it properly. The sheet metal fence is and the gate.
Yes. So it's in the top left corner on the screen along Osage.
Okay, and
And do you know the, sorry, Ken, do you know the distance of that? What is the general length of that?
I do not know off of the top of my head.
51 feet.
Thank you.
how many feet did you say?
51.
51. I was gonna say 50, so pretty close. I'll point out where the chain link fence that is still there is. There was a picture of it earlier, but
Yeah. I believe it's along the property line. So the chain link fencing is along the northern property line, which is on the right-hand side of the screen, and it wraps around the western, I believe, and applicants, please tell me if I am wrong.
It's west property lines was really 45, but on the south side near 44th Street, there's a couple hundred feet of wood fencing. And in the picture that we saw, you can see the wood fencing in one picture, and then it ends, and there's about 10 or 20 feet of chain link fence there. That could probably be fencing.
Mr. Chairman, so do we have an estimate about how many feet of chain link fence do we have? Is it
520 feet.
quite a bit?
About 520 feet.
Thank you. That's the question I have.
Any other questions for Ms. Beal? I do have a question for you. So if you were talking about the industrial flex as the use and then light industrial, so just to be sure that I'm understanding, so if we're looking at the industry flex, then we'd be allowing the use of multi-tenant structure for the use of equipment, rental and services. And then light industry is the question I'm gonna have, motorcycle sales, service, storage rental, service provider, storage yard, vehicle service or other permitted use within the zoning district. And then what you had mentioned, I believe, is that from a previous application, similar situation, we removed the light industrial component, which is the use of a site where there may be the use of heavy equipment or machinery and or noise, smells, environmental pollutants, or fire concerns, typically for manufacture, processing, fabrication, analysis, assembly, treatment, and or packing of finished products or parts. The use of paint booths not related to vehicle services shall be included in this use category. So based on what the applicant has indicated for the CUP, for the CUP use for the PVC storage, would the PVC fall under the light industry or would it fall under the flex industry?
Mr. Chairman, I believe that the tenant for the PVC company would fall under industry flex
Okay,
as opposed to light industry.
okay. Any other questions? All right, thank you very much. Staff, do we have anybody here that signed up for this? Is there anybody from the public that's here to testify on this matter? All right, seeing none, then we will go ahead and go back to the applicant for rebuttal testimony.
Thank you, commissioners. Scroll back up to this picture. Along this property line that is up against the residential district is a drainage canal or irrigation canal. It's the Thurman Mill lateral canal and it has a 50-foot easement. So 25 feet of each side of that is their easement. Now, within the canal itself, there's a number of trees, tall shade trees, and it's all the way up and down that property line that pretty much obscure any kind of vision from the residential to us. So even though our building's about 10 feet from the 5 feet from the property line, we're about 40 feet away from any residential uses because of that canal. You can see that canal right here. As I mentioned in these pictures, this is the wood fence. And of course, it ends just past my picture here and turns into this chain link fence over there. And we don't have an issue with the requirement to make that a wood fence along there. You can see towards the back here, let's see if I can zoom in a little bit on that one. Kind of give you an idea of what's going on down here. So I hear the word sheet metal a lot, and all metal is made from sheet metal. All metal panels, metal standing seam roof, it starts as sheet metal, same as corrugated siding. This is actually corrugated siding that's on there. So yes, it's sheet metal, but it's not like your flat sheet metal panels. So it's meant to be a an industrial type use product in there. You can see all the other businesses along there are all right up against the street as well. The fence along the northwest property line is, I don't even know, I don't have a good picture of it. It might be on the other property for all I know, but all the fences between the properties along that stretch of Osage are pretty much chain link or chain link with slats in it. Just a couple other things I wanted to point out that weren't in the original one. We're providing bike parking, we're providing an accessible path to travel in. The application actually had 5 feet for that sidewalk, but upon further review of the code, turns out that 4 feet is the minimum that's allowed. The previous public works projects put in some storm drainage rock basins in here. And so we're reconfiguring some of the site to prevent any automobiles from driving over those as well, so they can be maintained as drainage basins. And then we're meeting all of the site triangles, vision triangles. And as I noted before, we have a bunch of type 1 trees already. And so we're proposing type 2 trees for the new ones. We're going to leave the type 1s alone. And so to that extent, we feel that we adequately meet the intent of the code to provide shade trees that will eventually get very tall and wide and provide the shade that we so desperately love around here. That's all I have.
Thank you. Any questions for the applicant? Ms. Smith?
What are your thoughts on if we were to prohibit the use of light industry?
It's a weird one, as Hannah mentioned, because the industry flex actually says it allows light industry in there. And then I think there's another section of the code that defines industry light as something else. And I don't know if they're one and the same, but I know the requirements that you guys are looking for. You don't want big loud machinery in there. That's one reason why the throttle works moved out. So we don't have any large machinery there. We wouldn't want any machinery. So if it could be defined, more clearly defined in the light industry, because we do have building materials and sales on the site, which I think might also go under light industry.
But no concerns, and I think our concern would be that 500-foot residential, making sure there's not loud noise, smells, that kind of thing.
Right.
But it sounds like if we can limit it to that, you're just concerned that it might be an overbroad category that would capture things that don't have those effects.
Exactly. You know, one thing we just don't want to do is we don't want to lose existing tenants. And so Foothills Granite does cut granite, but it's a quiet sound. Their machinery is all inside. And then they sell it from there. And they've been a great long-term business in Garden City, and we'd hate to lose them. So that's one thing that I would just be wary of. As Hannah mentioned, the occupancy permits, there were occupancy certifications for Steel Automotive, for the Pinstripe Guy, South to North Land Cruisers, and JMR Motorcycle. Foothills Granite will have to apply for their occupancy permit. And as part of this conditional use permit, we've actually already applied for our occupancy review permit for that.
Thank you.
Any other questions for the applicant? Mr. Brown?
Mr. Chairman, yes, I want to return. I gave a warning that I would want to ask some questions. Sir, would you point out, using that pointer, first of all, is there chain link fence all along the Thurman Mill ditch? Is that chain link fence along the whole distance?
No, you can see in this photo right here, it actually stops at the building. And so behind the building, there's no chain link fence. The edge of the canal is getting there pretty close. As Stacy mentioned, she put in some shoring back here. And so it kind of precludes the ability to put a fence in there because it would be right on the bank.
So there's no fence there along that whole distance. There's no fence. Is that correct?
Yeah, not until we get to the corner. Let me show you where that is.
Yeah, point with your pointer where the chain link then actually starts and where it exists. So I have a better picture.
So the wood fence goes from the corner up to about here. And it's actually over here, sorry, up to here. And then you see how it bends there. That's the chain link fence. There's only about 20 feet of it right there. And then there's no chain link along the back here until you get back here, and it starts right about here to the corner, and then it's all the way across that property line to the front.
That prompts another question then. We said the concern has to do with the expense. This is just, I'm trying to get some information that we might use in coming to a decision what we want to do about the fence. Would it be more acceptable than if, let's say that we came up with a methodology where you didn't have, you suddenly have this all expense at once, it could be spaced out over, let's say, five years or so. Would that be a more acceptable solution than if we were to decide we're not going to grant a waiver here and we want that replaced? Would that be a more acceptable solution to you?
I'll have to let Stacy answer that one.
You know, a big part of the issue there is privacy and security for the tenants. So if that fence then would have to be moved back to the property line. So I would incur the expense anyway, but in order to keep the space safe for the tenants, I would want to keep a fence like that. And it would also block the garbage bins from the street.
Okay, I think I have a picture.
Yeah.
Yeah,
have a
I would
quick-
be happy to paint it or something that would make it more nicer from the street. But that back lot is not mine.
This one.
That's,
And I do have a question for staff.
All right, thank you.
In the decision document under item 5, prior to occupancy on the condition, it says all chain link fencing, barbed wire and sheet metal fencing shall be removed and replaced with code compliant fencing. And then A is the fencing along Osage Street shall be no greater than 3.5 feet. And then B is just the chain link fence visible from 44th Street. Shall be removed or replaced with code compliant fencing. So are we talking about the entire length of chain link fence, Ms. Veal, or are we just talking about the section that's visible from 44th Street that's chain link?
Mr. Chairman, to clarify, that item B, 5B, is specific to what is visible from 44th Street. So just a small portion of it. And then item 5A is specifically regarding the sheet metal fencing and gate. And the reason why it's the 3.5 feet tall is because that is what our transportation needs list policy calls for, as well as our code for frontages, where if it is along the property line, the fence can't be any taller than 3.5 feet unless it's set back 10 feet with landscaping.
And so just to make sure that I'm understanding what the condition is the condition isn't saying that all of the chain link fence on the property is to be removed. It's only to say that the chain link fence is visible from 44th Street.
I think this condition needs to be further clarified because the top part says all chain link fencing, but below it says item A and B. So I think it does need a little bit of cleaning up.
And so would code be visible from the right of way on the chain link, or is it technically that all fencing, regardless of whether it's visible, would need to be replaced?
I think what code calls for is all chain link fencing because it's a prohibited fencing material.
Okay. And then the item with the item regarding the fence along Osage is that, so if they were to lower it to 3.5, they can keep it on the property line.
Yes, that is correct.
Or if they wanted to set it back 10 feet, they could and still have it blocked potentially, and then it could be the 10 feet or the 6 feet, and remain metal.
So, Mr. Chairman, the metal part of this fence is also what is not allowed. The sheet metal is a prohibited fencing material. And then it's the height of the 6-foot tall fence on the property line is also not allowed. So it's kind of a two-parter of code issues.
Okay. And then I'm trying to think of a scenario where we had a similar application. Was it the auto place over on 36th Street and Chinden, where we had a fence along a alley? Did we allow for some sort of I don't know, I don't think that it was a waiver, but it seemed like we were able to come up with some other solution where, because they were concerned about safety and having that enclosed right on the property line. And they did maybe like a smaller inset.
Mr. Chairman, that was Ozzy's. That
Mhm.
name of the place is Ozzy's, remember? And that did have a bunch of chain link and we did something with it.
Mr. Chairman, I don't remember the specifics of that, other than I do recall you allowing a phased approach to taking down some of the chain link and replacing it with something more code compliant over the course of like 5 years, for
Okay.
example. There was another conditional use permit. On the south side of Chinden, it was also for another vehicle services use, I believe. Same issue of chain link fencing. The commission at that time determined that any chain link fencing visible from the public right of way needed to be taken down or replaced, but everything in the back that was screened from view could remain.
Okay, thank you very much. That's helpful. I appreciate it.
Mr.
So,
Chairman,
yes, sir.
that drops a question on, along with yours. If we were thinking about this, do we have, somebody can estimate about how much of the 520 feet of chain link would be observable from 44th Street? Have we got any way of figuring out approximately?
I believe the applicant, Mr. Hagan, said something like, was it 20 feet?
Yeah, it wouldn't be too much. It would probably be, this is a 280 foot long, 285 foot long property line. So this is visible all the way to here. There's a shed, storage shed here that has enclosed sides. So you wouldn't be able to see it past there. That's about 60 feet. And then the 20 feet here.
So that would be total about 80 feet.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And so we do have some additional questions for you, sir. I just needed some clarification from staff, so thank you for your patience.
Yep.
Yes,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. I appreciate you bringing this application forward to us. And I think I heard you say that you have no issue with making the chain link fence wood. And I'm curious how that differs from like the metal siding fence.
Well, I was referring to just this little bit right here that's down at the corner that you see in this picture. Just because it's like a little extension of the wood fence there, so it makes sense that it should actually be wood, or we could just take the chain link out. There is a requirement in the code to have a 6-foot wood fence between C2 and R. So that is something to consider.
Okay, thank you.
any other questions for the applicant?
One quick clarification, Mr. Chair, back to the 500 foot. I was just looking a little more at that flex light industry, and it appears to me that the required setbacks that we wouldn't have to exclude light industry, that the setbacks involve particular types of emissions activities, and those would either occur or not occur. And then that would come into play or not come into play. So are you asking for a exception to the 500 feet? Or is it more that if it becomes an issue in the future, it becomes an issue in the future? But as far as you know, there's not going to be anything within.
Right.
the 500 feet.
Hannah actually brought that one up. We weren't addressing that one at all, but to that point, I believe any occupancy permit that gets applied, that would get worked out
At
as
that
part of that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. That was my understanding. I just wanted to make sure it was yours as well.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Anything else that you would like us to know?
About the trees one, if we don't get that one written to be per code, I would need to have clarification as to, do we cut down all the type 1 trees and put up type 2 trees? Or do we leave the type 1 and put 7 type 2 trees up? That would then have like 12 trees along Osage, and likewise along 44th. So there's some clarity to the verbiage there that would need to be addressed.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
And sorry, commissioners, I always forget to say dear commissioner. So thank you, commissioners.
Thank you, appreciate it. All right, at this point, we'll go ahead and close the public hearing and then move into the discussion amongst the commissioners. Anybody want to start out? Commissioner Brown?
I also have to take a stab at it. First, I have to make the following statement. I believe there are two of us that are sitting up here that were probably here in 2016 when we sort of kicked the can down the road on the fencing. And this is indicative of the problem when you do that, because if you don't enforce some of the reasons that we have things like getting away with chain link fencing and those kind of things, and sheet metal fencing and gates, then 20 years down the line, we still have Garden City looking like it used to look like. So that being said, it appears to me, first of all, I want to commend the people that bought this and all the work that they've already done. It's obvious to me that this is much improved over what it used to be. And these improvements that she's proposing to put in, I think will only make it better. And so in that sense, I'm in favor of trying to figure out how we can make this happen. So let's deal with the trees first. I think we should leave the trees like they are and let them substitute for that, because they're there. We saw the pictures of them. I understand what it says in the rules, but I think we have the power to say, yes, let's go ahead with what the applicant is proposing with regard to landscaping as far as it had to deal with trees. And so that brings us to what I think is the only other issues, and there are two of those there. What to do about the chain link fence that's on location, and the gate and sheet metal fence, which is about 50 feet. With regard to the chain link, I think what we should do is, I think that was over there on, I think that was on Glenwood where we did that. Maybe not, but I think that the fix we did at that time that's a good one, and limit the put the requirement in there that they do away with the chain link fence and put a type of fencing that is in the code, which would be right where the chain link fence now is. So we just link in it, but limit it to that they have to take care of or replacing that visible. And we have an estimate that might be 80 feet in two sections. I think that we should do that and then let them leave the chain link fence and the other places where it is. And then it gets to the sheet metal. And that seems to be two issues there. Number one is the height and the location. My preference, the way I'm thinking right now, and looking at the pictures of that, was if we could work out something where we would have that replace that 51 feet. But where it's located, it says the problem that's along Osage, and Osage is a major problem, as we know. We don't normally, we can't really exercise what our requirements are on normal streets because of there's such a constricted right of way. Osage should never have been declared to be a street. Should always have been classified, in my opinion, but you have to go back to 1972 when the highway district picked that up from Garden City and it was declared a street because there were businesses on it. So that being said, I wonder if we could make something where we had that replaced, allowed it to be taller than what if we have the power to recommend to, well, we're not recommending, we're the deciding body here, to approve it, but let it stay at 6 foot and be on the property line where it is, but have the sheet metal fence replaced. That's sort of where I'm thinking of where we would go.
Thank you, Commissioner
And
Brown.
the other stuff that is different from what is normal, having to do with the category that we're gonna put the whole thing in, and I think we could do it just the way it's been written.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner Brown. Commissioner Shepard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner Brown, can I ask you a question of what you meant by like leaving the trees like they are? Like, are you suggesting they don't add any more trees or like
No,
as
they're-
suggested in?
No, but my understanding, they're proposing to add a bunch of trees. But leaving along the side where they already have the class 1 trees, to leave those to be adequate in just those areas.
I think they're proposing just to meet code, but not exceed code.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, I wanted to make sure I understood, because I like your idea about replacing the sheet metal fence. I don't think it's like aesthetically very pleasing. And I also agree as a compromise to let it stay at 6 feet because of the issues with osage that you talk about. And the chain link fence, I mean, he said he would be in favor of replacing that piece of it with wood fencing, so I would be okay with that. I'm still like thinking through like I would be in favor of phasing the fencing, because I understand that cost is an issue. And I would be in favor of like doing it over time if needed. But I'd like to see the sheet metal fence go. It's or something. I mean, the applicant said they'd be willing to paint it. I don't like the way it looks right now. So.
Mr. Chair. I just, as I so often do, I'll kind of echo what Commissioner Brown's comments were. I agree with most of those. And the reason I jumped in is because I agree with Commissioner Shepard that as much as I love the vintage corrugated metal look, actually kind of looks cool to me. It's not what code would suggest we allow. So I would want to replace that portion. I don't think painting it will work. I would want to give the property owner up to 5 years to do that, because I think to do it right, I would agree that we could allow a 6-foot property line fence there. I'll just say that we can. But I think that we should give them some time to stretch that out, do what they can do it.
And are you thinking that the timeline would be specific to just that section of fencing?
Yes, I
Okay.
think the 80-foot replacement can happen sooner than that.
Okay, so just the sheet metal would be the
I mean, I
5.
don't feel strongly about that. If you're fencing 2.5 years from now, then maybe they want to do that. So I don't feel strongly about it. If somebody else did, if we wanted to let the fencing happen over phased timeline, I'd be okay with that.
Commissioner Smith?
I agree with everything said. I think bring the trees down to minimum code. I think on the fence, I like the idea of replacing the chain link where it's visible from the public right of way, but I also understand that sometimes it's easier to do fencing all at once. I don't know how strongly we feel about the next 5 years. I'd probably say that we put all the fencing rules we want to have and make it a 3-year mark. Just all of the fencing needs to be fixed within 3 years. And we don't care whether it happens 1 year in or 2 years in, because then they can do all the fencing at once as they restructure this property, because otherwise it just feels like you're doing this little bit now and it's a little bit later, and then the fence people aren't gonna have the same kind of fence, and I feel like it's just gonna be an issue. So I'm actually okay with giving that amount of time kind of across the board on the fencing. But I also don't have very strong feelings about it, so I'll defer to the rest of the commission if we want to have particular things done in a shorter time frame.
Commissioner
Mr.
Brown?
Chairman, I have a question for Commissioner Smith along with but you're not Are you talking about going ahead and replacing all of the chain link or give them 3 years to replace 80 feet of it that you can be seen and the sheet metal fence?
I think if we're gonna grant the time, then all the chain link should go by the end of the time. Because it sounds like that's the development plan anyway, is to replace all the fencing, unless I heard incorrectly, just they don't want to do it now because there's a lot of changes that are gonna occur on the property. That's at least the part that I heard. And unless what they meant was that it is only the visible portions that are going to be replaced, but that didn't make a lot of sense, because you've got Osage, and then you've got the canal. And then what's to the north?
Are you talking about 44th Street?
Yes, that's 44th, okay. Yeah, so I guess the question is whether we're only talking about chain link that's visible from the public right of way, or whether we're talking about all the chain link. If we want to permanently exclude the non-visible chain link, I suppose we could.
That's sort of what I was thinking we do. We've done that. If it's not visible
Then it
from
doesn't matter.
44th Street, I think and we're taking care of it along Osage. I think that we would just, what I had in mind was just let them leave the chain link fence there. Chain link, I don't think it has any barbed wire on it. So some places we've made them take care of that off, but this chain link, the pictures don't indicate it's any barbed wire on it. So we'll just let them leave it.
So then we're just talking about the visible chain link
Yeah,
and the
that's,
sheet metal, and whether those should be together within the same timeline, or whether we want to stagger it in some way.
well, Mr. Chairman, I sort of think you might have the right idea. Just say that the change out of doing that, give them 3 years to have that done. And whether they want to do that 2 times, in other words, replace 80-foot of chain link with a wood fence or something else that meets code. Or all at once, then just leave it up to them. That's sort of what I'm thinking.
Just to make sure that I'm hearing it correctly. So we're talking about effectively, there's 3 years to get all the fencing into code compliance, except for the frontage on Osage that would be allowed to remain on the frontage at 6 feet. That would be the only non-code compliant fencing.
And the
Portion.
non-visible chain link. Would also technically be out of compliance.
But that's part of the new code required fencing that would be installed.
No, I thought what we were saying is that we would not require the non-visible chain link to ever be changed, because it's not visible. But Chairman Brown, was that it? Was that what you were saying? Yeah, so I think it was 2 exceptions. So within 3 years, the visible chain link would be replaced and the sheet metal would be replaced, but we would allow a waiver of the height restriction of the sheet metal. Does that sound right?
Right.
So at the end of the day, you'd have the 2 non-compliances that would go on forever would be the height restriction exception and the non-visible chain.
And that
everything
would
else is
also
covered.
include the location.
And the
The
location.
location is also.
That's right, an
Yeah,
exception.
that would continue on.
Yes.
All right. So where I'm at is that I might have looked at this a little bit differently just based on the site plan. I may have suggested that the fence be moved back on Osage, because it looks like you could potentially go to the building corner and then move it back, which would allow you to have a setback between Osage and so there would be a buffer potentially, and I don't know what it is from Osage to the building corner, but at least you could have some of that setback, which would then not make it so out of compliance with the height. Indifferent on the timing Except for, it seems like if we are going to require only 80 feet. And then the 50 feet. Probably sooner than 3 years, because it doesn't seem like a big lift, from my point. As opposed to, that seems like it would be a good give or take if do it now. To get into compliance, or do everything in 3 years. Because that's a much larger investment. As far as the landscaping goes, I'm in agreement that the minimum is fine. I'm fine with the use. And then it sounds like the applicant's fine with everybody coming back in for their occupancy determination. So those are my thoughts on the matter.
So, Mr. Chairman, I asked, so you're good with the 3 years? Pardon?
3 years for everything.
3 years for all the changes to the fencing.
Yes.
Okay, but of what we talked about, that would be change out the chain link where you can see it, approximately 80 feet or whatever. Change out and put code compliant fencing in. Along Osage. But have them step it back. In order with the code, and then it could be at 6 feet, right?
Yeah, and I don't know if it's necessarily stepped back all the way to get into code compliance. I would say probably closer to the building corner where you have existing landscaping continue. So you could continue the landscaping so that there is a setback.
So they could do that, but
How would we phrase that without just being like as close as practicable to the building or from the edge of the building?
we just leave it up to the staff. We can put it in there.
This is,
That's
kind of what we had on, remember we had a long debate about cinder.
Or
It was just the cinder one, which is nearby. Remember we had I think we had a lower fence at the property line and then the 6-foot fence.
That's perfect, thank you.
At the edge of the building, so we did a similar thing there.
So it looks like property line to building corner would be around 9'8" or 9'9". So you're getting pretty close to the required setback. And then you'd be almost at code compliance.
And then I just waive the tiny bit that remains.
There you go.
So we're saying that they would set it back to the building corner, whatever that measurement is, but then it could be 6 foot. Yeah.
Like it.
Makes sense.
All right, so that's a new discussion. Did you want to still discuss that? Commissioners? Smith, Wilde. Okay, and then, so that would be discussing condition prior to occupancy number 5. That would take care of item number 6 that's highlighted as well, because the trash bins and everything would still be hidden from view and screened. And then, let's see. The only other item we would have would be on site-specific requirements for the duration of the use on the setback. Under setbacks 1A, should that be removed since we have all mechanical equipment emissions, shipping and or delivery and other outdoor activities shall be located a minimum of 500 feet from any abutting residential districts?
So that's what I was asking about the applicant. I don't think it needs to be removed because what it says is that within the industry flex and the industry light, there is this setback requirement for particular types of light industry. And if those particular types do arise, you're going to want that 500-foot setback because you're not going to want it right up against residential property. And if they don't arise, then it just never becomes an issue. So I don't think we need to eliminate an entire light industry category just to account for the setback. I think the setback just stands and it'll come into play depending on what the occupants want to do with the property.
And so our intent is to allow the contemplated uses right now. But, so we're not thinking that the uses that we're hearing would be contrary to this setback requirement.
Correct, because the setback talks about equipment emissions, shipping and or delivery or other outdoor activities. So in theory, if this is all contained within a building, it's not outdoor activity. So you could have light use that does the, whatever that general definition of light use is, but doesn't trigger these setback requirements. So I guess what I'm saying is not all light industry triggers the setback, just certain types of light industry.
Because my only concern would be in this requirement that they have, for example, shipping or delivery, and that would trigger the setback of 500 feet in the CUP.
Correct.
But
Correct.
but I could see that they would have deliveries and shipments in the backyard space.
I don't think they can unless we waive that setback, and I don't think we should, and there's a reason why you keep shipping away from residences.
I would just be concerned with the definition of shipment or delivery, because if they're shipping PVC into the facility and or shipping it out.
I think that would be a code compliance officer's fun day to figure out what that means. I mean, I don't think we can waive it. Well, when I say can, I'm sure we can. I don't see why we would. That seems like a much bigger discussion. I would think it would be pretty upsetting to the neighbors if we suddenly started allowing all this activity that's supposed to be subject to a setback and not have it subject to a setback. But I also don't necessarily think we need to, throw the baby out with the bathwater and ban all light industry just because it may include this.
As long as we're allowing the use as industry flex and it covers it.
Right.
Okay.
Right. So I think there's just two components within industry flex. Industry flex says you can have these types of businesses, but if you're going to be doing these particular things with those types of businesses, then you have to deal with a setback.
Okay. All right, so that's taken care of. And then just wanted to make sure that we were clear on the code compliance for the landscaping, so that when we have the motion, it includes all of that. Let's see, where is it at? Is that? Is it? I think it's under 15. So it's prior to occupancy, item 15, a minimum of 1 class 2 or class 3 trees shall be planted in the frontage. So I believe that would need to be amended to really just say the minimum code compliance, including class 1 tree requirements. Okay, any other discussion on this matter? No? All right, well, I will entertain a motion.
There you go. Mr. Chair, I move that we approve the CUP FY 2025-0006 conditional use permit with the following amendments to the decision documents, that we remove the requirement for class 2 trees, and that we require that the development meet minimal code requirements as far as trees, that we impose the following restrictions and or amendments to the report regarding fencing, that the chain link fence where visible from the public right of way will be replaced with compliant fencing, and that the sheet metal fence along Osage will also be replaced with compliant fencing materials. However, the height limitation will be waived to allow for a 6-foot fence. That the location of said fence along Osage is moved back to the building corner to bring it in as close to compliance to the setback as possible, waiving any minimal remaining amount of the setback that would be left after that, as close as possible compliance. And also adding the requirement that the applicant has 3 years to bring all fencing into compliance per those terms.
Thank you, Commissioner Smith.
Would the maker of the motion also, I didn't see it in there, we were gonna require existing tenants to require certificate of occupancies for those existing tenants who didn't have them.
Is that already a condition? Or
I
is that
couldn't
in-
remember if I didn't see it.
And if it is not already a condition, that we'll require current occupants to seek certificates of occupancy to ensure compliance with code.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner
Second
Smith.
motion.
We have a second from Commissioner Wilde. Any further discussion? All right, hearing none, we'll take it to vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any noes? The ayes have it. Thank you very much. Appreciate your time. So that will conclude the new business, public hearing action item, and we will move on to the work session. Is there any need to take a break at this time? All right, hearing no need to take a break, then we'll go ahead and move into the work session. And today we are graced by our counselor. Thank you, sir.
Chairman, hello, commissioners, good evening. Am I okay here? Or would you like me to go to the podium?
Nope, I'm here.
Okay,
I'm here.
Everybody else
Okay,
is.
well, let me first say I'm kind of excited to be here because I have not had the pleasure of being summoned into a planning and zoning commission meeting for some time. I think that is I think that's a testament to staff and this commission that you don't need a lot of legal oversight. So I think that's a compliment that I usually am not asked to be here. I would also like to say this is probably the best planning and zoning commission I've seen in my 25 years, 23 years, whatever, with Garden City. And I've known some of you for years and years. So I'm kind of happy to be here. I have two things on the agenda, and if I could just go through them one at a time. And to set up both of them, Garden City, as you know, has current 3 land use code amendments that are pending. And I kind of pumped the brakes on all 3 of them to see what happened with that interfaith case. I did that after I went to the oral arguments in front of the Supreme Court, and the Boise City attorney got hammered. I felt bad for that Boise City attorney. And I knew that Boise was in trouble. So I told the mayor and council, we need to pump the brakes and just delay this until that opinion comes out. That opinion came out, Boise got spanked on that. And I've been talking to the city attorney over Boise and all the land use attorneys in town, private and public, and everybody's scratching their head trying to figure out how to comply with the interfaith case. And so on this remand, the first agenda item on the work session, the remand of ordinance 1051, there's a memorandum in there. I don't need to reiterate the memorandum. I'm going to stand to ask if there's any questions on that memorandum. But primarily, I'm here to figure out what the Planning and Zoning Commission would like to do with this 1051-24. Couple of highlights in the memo. Again, I don't need to reiterate everything, but on page 3, there was one silver lining in the interfaith case, and the silver lining was we now have the Idaho Supreme Court saying those old criteria for the cup are good, are legal, are constitutional. So as we go through this process with these 3 code amendments, I'm gonna throw out a random thought. Why don't we just cut and paste those standards because the Supreme Court already said they're good? That would be the easiest thing to do on this, because the cups are going to be coming back around too. That's probably going to be the next phase after we get through the PUD and the buffers and all that kind of stuff. So the silver lining for Boise, and I think for all the cities in the state, is that we now know that these conditions are on page 3 and 4. The Supreme Court says it's fine. So that's just kind of a random thought. Really, for this remand, though, the issues are how much discretion should the Planning and Zoning Commission have? Whose interpretation of code controls if there's a difference of an opinion on interpretation? Should the Planning and Zoning Commission's interpretation of code control, or should it be the City Council's interpretation of code that controls? And so I recommended to the mayor and council that this get remanded back to this board for primarily because I think it's going to make my life easier. because we have some good minds on this commission, and I want to take advantage of that. I want to know what you guys think about standard of review. I want to know what you guys think about whether it should be de novo or non-de novo on appeals. I want to know if you want to be given deference or if you want city council to start over. These are all things that I value your opinions, and I want to know what your opinions are on these things, and I will take it right to the mayor and council, and hopefully we'll come up with an end product that we will not get in trouble with when we get appealed to the Supreme Court. Other couple of highlights. I just wanted to touch on it, and I'll stand for questions on this particular agenda item is I had one, there was a typo. My specific comments on this particular code amendment are on page 10. Staff and I have worked quite a bit on all three of these ordinances, and a lot of my concerns have been already addressed by staff. But one of the things that I thought was interesting is bullet number 7 on my recommendations. I think there is still a provision in this code amendment that says the planning official's role regarding the public hearing for items that are processed under the administrative with notice process. If there are more than 10 people have submitted written testimony in objection to the application, or if there's significant adverse impact, then I think it gets kicked up to the city council at some point in time. I was just curious what this commission thought about that in particular, but I have concerns about standard of review. I have concerns about definitions. I have concerns about the appellate process, the administrative appeal process, how people know that their administrative rights are exhausted, those type of procedural due process concerns. And so that's why I recommended a remand. I'm hoping to take advantage of this board here. And with that, I stand for any questions. Thank you.
Chairman, if I may, you don't have the ordinance in front of you tonight. You just have Mr. Wadham's, excuse me. We've only worked together 20 years. Memorandum. This is intended to be scheduled again for another work session during the next meeting. So this is intended to be presumably very introductory.
The introductory thing, but whatever is said here is going to get reported from me. I'm a direct report to the mayor. So whatever happens here tonight, I will direct report to the mayor, and so he can start trying to decide what to do about this whole interfaith case. Thank you.
As well as presumably be in the ordinance that you see during April.
Yes.
Thank you. Open it up for discussion. Any
I've
comments?
been very close to the veterans decision. I have some opinions coming out of that case about the appellate process. I don't think they're particularly controversial, but I'd like to hear what everyone thinks and what Mr. Wadhams thinks. So I think that the standard should be de novo, and I'll kind of start at the beginning, but I think that when we are a decision-making body and then it goes up to appeal to city council, they can either choose to grant or deny the appeal. If they deny the appeal, then our decision stands, and now that decision can be appealed up for judicial review because we will be the final administrative decision. If appeal is granted, then under a de novo standard, the city council can decide whether or not they want to hold a public hearing. They don't have to. They can just go with our record of the public hearing and make a de novo decision based on that record. Or they can hold a whole new public hearing, have everybody come in, talk all over again, add that information to what's already in the record, and then make a decision from there. My biggest issue is if we were to add an error standard, and that's what I think Mr. Wadhams was talking about when he was talking about deference. And I think the problem with the error standard and where Boise has really gotten jammed up over the years is that a lot of times a city council, maybe not particularly ours, but a city council just doesn't like the decision we made. And it's not that we erred, it's just they want a different outcome. And maybe it's political, maybe it's practical, maybe, who knows, but for whatever reason, they just want to change the decision. And if we do our jobs right, we shouldn't have made error. And so then they go trying to dig for an error, to try to find an error, to try to justify changing the decision that they just want to change anyway. And so I think you create all kinds of, and that's exactly what I think happened, maybe not the way I phrased it, but in the veterans decision, I think that that's where you got that tension between city council having different considerations, different thoughts than planning and zoning. And, whether there was error or not error, and that's a bigger question, but I think that tension was caused by an unclear deferential error standard. And I don't see where that really gains us anything. I think our city council, they're our electeds, and I think that ultimate power should vest with them. And so I don't see an issue with the de novo review. And I know some of the concerns were, well, we don't want to have to do it twice. We do all this work, then city council does all that work, but they can avoid that by simply not having a second public hearing and just making the decision on the record. So I feel like that is the cleanest process up. That does, I suppose, put in a little bit of an additional burden on us in that if city council doesn't grant the appeal, we better have a clean enough record that we survive judicial review all on our own, because we're not gonna have a buffer of city council in between us and the Supreme Court. Those are my thoughts.
So you said two different things on de novo review, which confused me. You said you like a de novo review, which I agree with. Should be, these cases on appeal should be clean reviews by the city council. They should be able to hear Joe Blow testify here, and they should be able to hear Joe Blow testify. Maybe they give it 2 minutes more time. I don't know. But then I think you said, but they could just grant the appeal without hearing evidence. So are you saying the city council should have the opportunity to have a de novo hearing?
Well, I think that so de novo can be, I think de novo can be factual de novo or legal interpretation de novo. So a de novo review doesn't mean they have to take new facts. A de novo review means that they could reinterpret or have a different view of the code than we do. And they may not need new facts. They may look at it and go, these facts are perfectly clear, but we think P&Z got the code wrong. We don't need more evidence. We just are going to change the decision because of an interpretation. Or they could say, I want to hear it all over again because I don't feel like P&Z had enough facts to make the decision. And we want to reopen the public, well, not really reopen, have a whole new public hearing to be able to ask more questions or whatnot. So I think either of those are a de novo standard. I think when you're talking about not having a de novo standard, you're talking about more like an abuse of discretion standard, where it's a closed record with a deferential standard where you are just looking for error or not error, which I believe is what we have now, although what we have now is a little fuzzy in the code, but as far as I can make it out, that's our current standard.
I'm one of the, I think, how many of us are on this commission right now that aren't attorneys? I think there are only about 2 of us, right? Or maybe 3 of us. But anyway, I happen to agree with these 2 attorneys. That might be a bad sign. But that was
Converted you finally.
Well, no, you didn't convert me. I was already thinking of this, and I was thinking based upon my experience. I've been on this commission quite a long time, and I can think of 2. Well, the primary reason that I agree with Commissioner Smith on, there have been instances where we have been overruled in the past, and one of them by the city council. One of them became a big issue with a certain person that was the chairman at the time. And at that time, I was on sort of the outs with him, because my position on that particular time was I didn't mind the fact that they changed that. They wanted to go a different direction than what the commission did at the time. And I think that I can see all kinds of instances where that can happen. And it's not, and not because it's a criticism. They may be doing it for a lot of different reasons, but if I understand it, if you go de novo on a review, then it's on them to explain why they're going to do it. and to justify that if they're going to do that, and they ought to be able to do that. That's my thinking of it. And then I can think of one other instance where we actually got in trouble. And our attorney knows more about that, but where they reversed us. And then we got in trouble. We had to we had to amend a bunch of stuff in our zoning code at the time. But that wouldn't have changed, probably wouldn't have changed from that. They probably could have done it, but maybe they would be more specific in thinking about what they had to do if they were able to do it. I guess what I'm saying is I can see instances where I don't have a problem with the fact that they would do something different than we did. And it wouldn't necessarily be a criticism of what we did.
I think having a deferential standard, and I feel like this came out in interfaith, and I don't know, Mr. Wadums, if you agree, but I think that some of the weird tension was that the applicant is put in a position because of that deferential error standard, the way Boise set up, that they have to simultaneously argue that the Planning and Zoning Commission erred, while at the same time arguing that the final decision of council was correct. And so it's basically like two judicial reviews at the same time. And it puts them in this awkward argument position of really fighting two judicial reviews, because they have to justify the fact that city council got the decision-making power to begin with, because they have to begin down talking about what planning and zoning did. And in theory, an applicant on judicial review should only be talking about the final decision, which is city council's decision. But if you add in that error standard, now we're also talking about planning and zoning's decision.
Amen.
And that's a lot for an applicant to try to reconcile. And when you don't have the error standard, then you do have that clean, that is the final decision. City council's is, and it doesn't, other than the underlying factual record, it really doesn't matter what we decide. Because city council's is what goes up on judicial review. That was
That
some
feels
weirdness
like
too.
the real lesson in that case.
Yeah, that just created all this procedural strangeness.
Yeah.
And I don't know how you get around it without eliminating the error standard. And maybe there's a way, but that just seems like the simplest way to solve the problem.
Well, in fact, and I did read the whole decision, and thank you for providing that. And I've been following it because I've been very interested in that. I'm one of the volunteer things I do, I'm a DAV volunteer driver at the VA hospital every Friday. And twice a year, I go to the shelters and pick up anybody that claims he's a vet. So I've been over there, I've seen their facility, and their facility where they are now is totally unacceptable. So I think it's too bad that's what happened, but what happened in that, if I understand it right, they alleged in doing that the planning and zoning in Boise had made an error, but then they weren't able to, with what they put together with it, they didn't justify that, saying that, if I understand the basics of the ruling. And so they stuck it right back to Boise and said, all right, you guys screwed up, saying the city council did, where if I understand it, if they went from a novo review, maybe they would have done a better job and justified what they were doing and why they were doing it.
Charlie, these recommendations bulleted out are really helpful to me to kind of compartmentalize how you need to work with staff to kind of draft a red line ordinance.
Right.
Or maybe even repeal and replace and write a new ordinance. It would be helpful for me at our next work session to have a draft red line. And so I would say no rush on scheduling the next work session. To take the work, you've done all the analysis and you kind of know generally what we need to do. So it would help me, and then we can kind of talk through the red lines.
I absolutely agree with that.
Easy, yeah. And I'll work with staff, I'll work with Ms. Thornborough, we'll come up with some red lines.
And I think the reason statement's a lot harder issue because I didn't see a lot of clarity in the opinion. The court was clearly dissatisfied with Boise's reason statement, but I don't know if that translated to, you know, an exact test or instruction for what it was kind of a, this just isn't good enough without a little bit more guidance. And so I feel like all we really learned from that is just don't do what Boise did, but I'm not sure, you know, whether what we decide to do would also pass muster or not. I got the sense that what they were saying is that they want the reason statement to address more, or at least summarize the conflicting points. And I think they made clear that it's not good enough just to say, well, it's all in the record. Go look at the 800-page record. It's in there somewhere. But they also can't possibly mean that you have to regurgitate that 800-page record into a reason statement. So I'll defer to Sir Wadhams. I don't have a good.
Mr. Chairman, may I respond to that? Okay, so, and I agree with everything that's been said. The case has more questions than answers, really. One of them is, you know, what does it mean? I think my pragmatic legal advice is the longer the record, the longer your reason statement has to be. Because they say every dispute of fact, every dispute of law has to be in your reason statement. And they jab Boise on both those cases where they said there's thousands of pages of record, there's hundreds of people have testified, and the reason statement was 1.5 pages long. So I think the pragmatic thing is the longer the record is, more reason statement you need. And the other part that I've been telling, I've been advising is that you got to follow your code. Even if you don't like it, you got to follow your code. If you don't like the code, you got to amend the code. And one of the problems in the Boise code was it said a difference of opinion is not a grounds for reversal. And that's exactly what they did. They reversed on a difference of opinion, and their code said you can't do that. I don't think our code says one way or another, but I mean, those are things like going back to how much discretion do we want to give the Planning and Zoning Commission. But yeah, we have to, whatever the code says, we have to follow it. And if the city doesn't like the code, we need to amend it. And the longer the record, the longer the reason statement probably should be.
Can I ask a question? And it might not be well formulated, but would it be possible if somebody provides oral testimony to say, if you want to dispute a fact, that you have to provide written testimony of the fact that you're disputing? I don't know if that's possible to do.
That's an option. I've been kicking around, if I may, Mr. Chair, I've been kicking around. I know, well, for example, the biggest city in the state, if they have a big application that's going to be disputed, that they are thinking they're going to send it out to a private law firm to come up with a reasoned statement. They have a bigger budget than I do here. I don't have a budget to send out reasoned statements out to private law firms at $500 an hour, $600 an hour. So that's just cost prohibitive for us. We're not going to do that. Another idea along those lines is make the applicant fill out how they comply with code in the application. You know, tell us how this is consistent with the comprehensive plan. Tell us how this is not adverse to the neighborhood. Make them do some of the work for us. It's their application. So that idea has been kicked around.
And they also can't object to the reason statement if they wrote it.
Then the legal issues invited error. Then it'd be invited error, right?
That helps.
So yeah, we've been kicked. I'm considering everything, and that's honestly, I wanted you guys to tell me what you think, because I'm considering everything. I'm talking to attorneys at Gibbons personally, and I'm talking to all the city attorneys. The listserv, the municipal attorney listserv is totally blowing up over this, and because all the municipalities are facing the same issues. And I just feel sorry for the small towns that don't have the staff.
I think farming it out is excessive.
Yeah.
I think farming it out to essentially contractors to write reason statements is excessive. I think it's a huge burden on small jurisdictions, like you said, and I don't think it's what the Supreme Court demands. I mean, I think there's something in LUPA about how, I'm paraphrasing, but something about how this is normal language for normal people, written simply, something along those lines, that this isn't meant to be a particularly onerous process. And I don't, even though I think the opinion might imply that level of complexity, I don't think that's ultimately what they meant. And I don't think on the next veterans type decision, I could see them backing off that a little bit. in the future.
Well, Mr. Chairman, that prompts a question that I have, Charles. Pursue this thing that was mentioned of having the applicant justify when you're gonna do it. I would presume, how could that be worked where obviously all cases that wouldn't necessarily requirement, that with some of them that are maybe more difficult or more complex, I don't know what the exact word is, could something be fabricated where it would come down to maybe the director of planning of where Jana would have to sort of make a call on something like that. In other words, when she saw something that sort of flagged it in her mind based on her experience in that, where she would say, well, you know, we're going to have to put a special requirement on them and they're going to have to justify some of this if they want us to do it this way. That
Chairman, Commissioner, I think that's a possibility as well. I think everything's on the table at this point.
Yeah, well, my thinking that way is I don't think you want to avoid finding out that you need to have that done when they come before us, for example. And then we discover it in the process of our deliberation. And at that point, they way down the line, you know, they've submitted all their stuff. So I kind of think if you're going to do that, you're going to have to figure out a way where you can identify it early on in the process. So you can go to those people and say, all right, Jenna, in her case, you say, this is going to require you to do more justification of what you want to do.
I would agree with that too.
Yeah, I agree with that. When I first started thinking about what you said about the, like, farming it out to the applicants and having them come up with these reason statements, I feel like for like the average applicant, that might be really onerous and even expensive if they have to hire an attorney to do that kind of work for them or something. But then like a sophisticated developer that has a lot of resources would be different. So are we talking about like these in like a bigger rezone type case that they would have to do that versus like the small, like I want to build a fourplex thing?
Well,
or...
yeah, well, that's my idea, but somebody that knows what they're doing. And I went to Jenna because I always found that Jenna knows what she's doing. Anyway, what I'm saying is I don't think you want to wait till it gets before us to suddenly discover, wow, we don't have a very good justification here. What's done?
I would agree with all that. Yeah. Well, there's your introduction. I mean, and this, I'm happy to keep talking about it, but I promised Jenna I would be short and sweet.
Thank you. I
Good
appreciate
night
that.
for once this time.
And I do want to point out a couple of things where this matter's already been kicked around and some of the commissioners have already been spoken to. You'll see in the staff report and the decision document, the draft decision document that you've received tonight, that the draft decision document now is a staff recommendation versus previously it was drafted for and in denial.
Yeah,
And
notice that.
And another section of the staff report does talk about potential motion language. We might need to tweak that a little bit as we go on, but those are a couple of changes that we've already addressed.
Looks really nice.
Well, thank you to staff, not me.
Well, that's my introduction on that one. Mr. Chair, would you like me to continue going on that one or?
Yeah,
can
I'll
we beat that?
just add to the whole, because the way that I'm holding this is that there's a few things that we're talking about and some of these are interrelated. You know, the standard of review, I think is applicable, but we're also talking about just a couple of items that we actually are the decision makers on. So conditional use and variances. And then when it comes to appeals, we're change of use, DR, floodplain, manufactured home and signs. So just thinking about, you know, how does that actually affect us when we're thinking about the review and what our standards are? And then the reason statement, seems like this is going to be more of an overall application to all decisions that are made. And my concern is that staff is already overwhelmed. And part of that's because the applicants don't know what they're doing. And so if we are looking at placing more of an onus on the applicant, I could see it then just turning into more of a burden for staff. So looking to come up with creative ways to avoid that would be helpful. The code is very difficult to go through if you're not used to it, and trying to get someone that's coming in for a CUP on an automotive repair shop, not that I'm creating stereotypes, but that doesn't deal with law or code, that then is being asked to prepare some sort of statement about how they're adhering to code and going through hundreds of pages of documents to try and figure that out could be impossible. And so it seems like if there was some creative ways, and maybe other jurisdictions, not necessarily even in Idaho, have dealt with this, that could be used as comparisons, could be helpful. Because the last thing that I want to see is all of this just be put on to staff as a good idea, and then it turns into a really bad idea. So that's what the reason statement seems like. There's a lot more work to do on that. I do appreciate everything that you've provided us, and there's been a lot there. I've seen all of your emails and your legal work, so thank you very much. I didn't go unnoticed that was a big lift, so thank you.
Yes, sir.
And then as we get into this PUD code, I think it's important just to think about the way that we're talking about just general code standards. So specific language that's being used, and when you're talking about aspirational versus objective, that stands out for me, but then also objective criteria that are required. So common law, code, rules all need to be considered as part of that, because it's easy for us sometimes to overlook that, I think. And then of course, just the specific code standards that we're really thinking through, like the enhancements, for example. I mean, those are going to set standards, and those are specific, but they're not necessarily any need common law, code, or rule. So keeping those two items separate of, Attorney Wadham's having you just be specific, like this is what you need to have here, right? Common law, rule, ordinance, whatever. And then this is specific to where we can be a little bit more creative. Right. So just some thinking as I've been working through this.
PUD, okay, Chair, Commissioners, I also have a memo on that in your packet, and I will just summarize a couple of points and then I'll stand for questions. This is also on the work session. This is one of the other of the three that I think we should look at under the lens of veterans or interfaith. During this process, I've been asked several specific legal questions, and so I tried to put answers into the memo on all the specific questions I've been asked. If anybody ever has any specific questions, you can always email me and I'll try to find an answer for you. So there's some specific questions that were asked. I try to go through all those, and there's some interplay between these three ordinances. But for example, on page 5, I have a section on we should be specific on who has standing to appeal when the right to appeal begins. And I'm talking both administrative appeal and judicial appeal. I go again about on page 6, I talk about objective standards. My department has worked a lot with development services. Development services have been great to work with to come up with some objective terms when the terms are kind of questionable. And I have a visual aid for y'all right here, because I have an intern, and I test an intern. I said, pull out all the terms you think are subjective, run it through the AI filters, see what AI says, whether it's objective or subjective. And then if you think it's subjective, come up with objective alternatives. And that's what she came up with, all the potential subjective terms and the objective alternatives. So Ms. Thornborough and Ms. Beal and my department, I think we've gone through all this, and I think we've done a pretty good job of finding terminology that we feel is objective. So that section I think has been taken care of. But it was just interesting. It was an interesting exercise, and God bless interns for stuff like that. People ask questions about affordable housing. I answer that. There was a question about whether PUDs should have a different standard from residential and commercial, and I think that probably makes some good sense there, and I would probably make that recommendation. And there's some examples about that. And then somewhere in here, and a question was asked, and it was actually Chairman Montoya that asked, is PUD a really de facto rezoning? And the answer is yes. So I mean, you call it whatever you want to call it. It's a de facto rezone is what it is. And so we have to be careful from taking standpoint, so on and so forth. I did learn on page 14, I did learn that Boise rarely uses PUDs anymore. So I've asked staff, and sometimes I ask questions facetiously or only half being serious, but I threw it out there. I said, why don't we just get rid of PUDs? And I was told that's not a good idea, but we could just totally get rid of PUDs because Boise's not using PUDs. They have an alternative mechanism. And so I talked about that. And then in terms of objective standards, in here somewhere I have examples on page 7. You know, if somebody says, what is an objective standard? Well, I have examples on page 7 that I think have been fully vetted, and I'd be comfortable defending those in court. So that's a high level on this PUD ordinance. And with that, I stand for questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And Chairman, if I may, I also have this scheduled jointly for a work session to go through some of the changes since the last time we met on this. And when you're ready, I'm happy to start.
Okay. Any questions for council on this to go through any of the memo? Questions? Any questions?
Fine. Yes.
All right.
Thank you.
Turn it over to you.
Maybe excused.
Run away.
I'll stay for a while until I get really hungry. Thank you, everybody.
You'll see. I don't. Might be easier just to be able to pull up the language, but I really do want to thank the commission for all your work on this. These code amendments, you're seeing them again and again and again, but I truly do believe that they're making good code. I hope that is the case. The first change that I wanted to point out since last time that you saw this was the purpose statement has been updated a little bit. We talked about aspirational in previous versions, and now it's just discussing that the purpose is to accommodate exemplary site developments that are in conformance with the comp plan, more or less. And then the next matter that I wanted to point out is in the administration, there's a clause that's been added, just noting that because this is an applicant proposal to be outside of code, that inherently there is some unavoidable subjectivity. And an alternative to this process is to adhere to all code standards. I think it may have been your suggestion. Then in previous reviews, there was a point system. And there's language that's been added instead of having the point system, trying to get at proportionality of the request. And so this the required improvements, E1, notes that the improvement shall be proportional. And I believe that legal will continue to look at this and bless this language before it comes for hearing. Maybe make some tweaks, but just an attempt of identifying some standards for proportionality as well.
Do you mind if I ask a question during your presentation, or would you like me to wait until the end?
Not at all. Please feel free to jump in.
In administration, so on page 8D, actually it's item 4. And council, this is a question partly for you too. I believe that there was some discussion on the process of going through the PUD. So we have under the administration, item 4, when a PUD also qualifies as subdivision, the processing of the PUD permit and subdivision application shall occur at the same time. I believe on your memo, page 12, it just talks about some of the processes. Are you going to review the processes as well, just to make sure that, because you do have in here. Let's see. I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page when it comes to a PUD and a subdivision, and that the process is consistent.
Yes, I will look at that, yep.
Let's see. So it's on page 12, I think, item A, where it says, the commission's approval in principle of the preliminary development plan shall be necessary before an application may submit a final development plan. Approval in principle shall not be construed to endorse precise location of uses, configuration of parcels, or engineering feasibility. Upon approval of the preliminary development plan, and application for a final development plan may be filed. The commission shall recommend to council approval or denial of a PUD. I just want to make sure that we're good with the process.
Yes, Chairman, I will look at that process. I think that wording I got right from our website, if I remember right. But yes, I'm going to be looking at the process.
Okay,
Yes, sir.
thanks.
And just for everybody's, I think you're all aware of it. The reason that that's found in this PUD, admin is because 95% of PUDs are also subdivisions as they come through. To Mr. Bottom's earlier point, as we've discussed, the intent is that the changes make PUDs much less utilized as a tool, that people will be able to go straight through a subdivision. And so this is to make a truly special, unique development, is the intent, more along the intent of what a PUD tool is intended to be in planning land use theory. Right. The categories are still remain, but they have become examples instead of providing the points. And some language has been cleaned up throughout those categories. And I am breezing through some of the comments that were provided by the commission. And if you want me to stop on any of those comments, I'm just trying to hit very big, broad strokes.
On going to the enhanced improvements, and we're talking about proportionality. Does anybody have any concerns with using proportionality as a way to determine?
I think it's great.
I don't know if it's the right time to have this answer the question, but how will it be determined was my question. Like, in some cases, it seems like it could be difficult, but
One, we'll go ahead.
that might be too much.
So we have the enhanced PUD improvements on 11, but it's also in the purpose statement, because it's talking about may deviate in certain respects from the zoning regulations as identified in code by providing proportionate or greater improvements.
I think that it's really solid language to reflect what I feel like we were all trying to convey at the last session, which is that, you know, without counting weird points, how do we articulate that what we're trying to do is give a little, take a little, give a little, you know, between the rules and the developer. And I feel like this phrasing, I really like it. I think it captures that intent.
I have a comment on that, but of course, relative, don't get me wrong, I understand why we did that as compared to where we had certain numbers where it weighted all of it. By just using the name, though, you're introducing a degree of subjectivity. when we just talked about it, about what you're doing. I don't have a better alternative, but
And I
we
think what
should,
Commissioner
we need to
Smith-
be aware of it. That's what it does.
I agree with you.
Just the
It's a
word.
subjective term, but it's subjective in the way we want it to be.
Yeah.
It gives us language that allows us to, does everything need to be a 1-for-1 proportionality? No, we have a little bit of flexibility, we think.
A little bit of
And
subjectivity.
I think it's well, a little bit of subject, because at the end of the day, it's not, if it were an exact science, you wouldn't need us, you just plug it into a computer.
Well,
You know,
that's correct.
we
Well, you would
have
have
some level
you
of-
have an AI program that would do it instead of us people.
You know, we're here because the whole point of having a commission is to have all of our judgments.
Right,
You know,
that's
factor into it,
correct.
but I think this is as close as we're going to get to that intent. I also like it because I feel like it's language that normal people understand. Applicants and members of the public, they know what proportionate means. They understand that concept. It's not, it's not super bureaucratic sounding.
Okay,
And so the planning and zoning commission would have we would be like the decision makers on whether or not it's proportional, or proportionate, is that correct?
well, we're gonna be recommending that.
Recommend-
Right, we'll be recommending. That this will continue.
Yeah, thank you. I was just thinking about like on page 11, under the required PD enhanced improvements, 1C, where it says the economic burden of providing the PUD enhanced improvements or PUD enhanced improvements corresponds with the economic gain of the code of the adjustment of waivers. Like to me, I was like, I wasn't sure exactly how that would necessarily play out exactly, but we don't have to have it play out exactly. To be able to recommend it.
Chairman, Commissioner Shepard, I would suggest that having the exact calculation you might not have, but generally you would have to make the finding, the determination that there's not a burden that is occurring because of the requirement that's being placed by the city, I guess.
Thank you.
There's been a new required finding, which goes to a point of discussion that I'd like to pause and discuss on. Previously, there was just the finding that no more than 20% of the gross land area is dedicated to a use that's not allowed. And then there was the question posed, should residential and commercial be treated differently? The new finding is trying to get at that, where the residential density would be capped, and staff threw in there at 50% more than what is permitted in the zoning district. On page 17, there's a note to the reader noting what the different densities are. So for example, in R2, the max density is 6 units per acre. And so there would be a cap at 9 units per acre, utilizing that no more than 50% additional. And then R3 is 35 and RM is, if it instituted, would be 15 units per acre. And so we can do the calculation. So the R3 would be capped at roughly 52, or the RM would be at 22 units per acre. It's just to give what that would look like.
So, and you said that's when we're talking about the 50%, which item is that?
It's in the required findings, starting on page 16. And there was a new required finding that you haven't seen in previous work sessions, and that's number 8 on page 17. And that would be a required finding that the residential density is less than 50% more than what is permitted within the zoning district.
Can you just explain a little more what that means? I think my coffee's wearing off.
Um,
What is it?
I'm certainly way outside of my coffee.
I'm having trouble tracking. What does it mean that the density is less than 50% more than what's permitted? Can you just maybe give an example that might?
I think this is a good pause, noting that this might need to be reworded.
I could also just be really tired.
Janet, you just go back, you gave us the numbers that gives us
Mhm.
previously, you might point that out.
So the intent of what it is intending to say would be that you have the residential density that's noted elsewhere in the base zoning district. And so in R2, for example, that's 6 units per acre. And then 50% more would be 3. And so you'd add that together and you'd have a max of 9 units per acre.
Okay.
And so it's not that you get unlimited additional density. There's a cap on what kind of density that you could get.
I see. So the intent, yeah, I just reworded it, I think, because I think it's the double,
Mhm.
it's not a double negative.
We can definitely work on the wording.
Okay.
And then I also want to pause there because there's been a court case that was, or not a court case, a process that was cited in Mr. Wadham's memo that actually really looks at separating the residential from the commercial. And I don't know how that would work in Garden City necessarily with almost everything. I would presume almost be mixed use request. And so I just really wanted to flesh that out and make sure that the desire and the intent is reflected in this code. And I'm not sure this proposal, and I'm not sure that it is there yet.
Yes, so thank you. So part of this was a question that I had regarding how do we apply residential in the same situation that we've applied commercial? And this came from the discussion that we had on the PUD that proposed the storage and using that to get through the process. And so if we're saying that we're going to allow for residential, then would there be a max like there is on the non-permitted use? So just, you see where I'm going with it? And so I've looked at this and I don't know that how it would really apply, but let's just say, for example, we're in an R3. And R3 allows for multifamily. So theoretically, you could have multifamily as the PUD with unlimited amounts of density. Unless you were capping it so that there wouldn't be a max. Right? So you see where I was going with it? Because we're saying that we're allowing the use as long as it's conditional or permitted within the zoning district. Anything that's not allowed in the zoning district is allowed up to 20%.
Right.
And so are there holes in any of these districts that we'd effectively want to fill with a PUD? And if not, then are we saying that on the residential side, is it going to be treated at the same 20% if it's not a permitted use? Because the proposal is for 20%, right? And that's what code currently is or 10%.
Gosh, I think it's 10, and then Ada counties is 20%, and that's where the 20% is coming from.
Mr. Bottoms, what have you seen? Just, I know that you've referenced other jurisdictions, other states that have had the difference.
Mhm.
Did anything stand out as just how they're applying different standards with commercial, industrial, or residential?
Chairman, I haven't done a super deep dive on that yet. It sounds like that I do need to do a deep dive based on this conversation, and I'm happy to do that. I have done cursory reviews of other jurisdictions, but I haven't looked at their specific criteria. So now I'll roll up my sleeves on that particular issue. I did want to say though, one of my marching orders that I've been given is to try to make this process simpler. And one of the comments Jenna has heard me say multiple times, I don't know if she likes the comment, but I currently on a PUD, we have like 13 criteria. We have the cup criteria, we have the design review criteria, and then we have these criteria. That's a lot of criteria. It'd be nice if we, my ideal world, the PUD criteria would be between 3 and 5, not 13 to 15. And so it just seems like it's getting pretty complicated. And my marching orders were to make it simpler, not more complicated. So I'll just throw that out for whatever it's worth.
I think that goes back to that tension between subjectivity and objectivity. The more criteria you put in, the less subjective,
Right.
but also the more lengthy and.
I'm not sure where the sweet spot is, to be honest. I don't know where the sweet spot is, but.
And I might just be going down a rabbit hole. It's just something that I was thinking about. But it sounds like most of our CUPs are for residential purposes anyways, that would fall within a category that's already permitted for residential. So I don't know if it's just not, if the juice isn't worth the squeeze, or if it's really not even a point worth discussing, because I certainly don't want to waste your time either if it's nothing that we need to go back through.
I think one of the things that needs to be decided is which conditions can be waived or deviated from and which ones can't. So that one project that was referenced earlier, that was a request for a waiver on everything, basically.
Wow.
And I don't think that's what the intent is. So
I mean, on the storage thing,
yes,
Yeah.
yes, I wasn't gonna mention any names,
That-
but on the storage.
that was trying to use a PUD and a process to sneak in another whole thing with no limits.
Right, they were trying to ask for a waiver on something that I think the code was pretty clear on.
Yeah.
You don't get a waiver on the 20% or the 10% or
right.
whatever, but.
But yeah, if we could cross-reference the zoning code with PUD to show
Yeah,
this is a requirement of the zoning code, this is a requirement of the zoning code, i.e. not waivable.
Right,
You know, I
Right,
think
that,
that
yeah, I
would be
think
super clear. And then we could just tell people, we can't waive this.
we're not gonna, yeah, here's the list of what's
You know,
not
we
waivable.
might want to, we might think it's a great idea, but we can't.
Right.
And that would be nice to have that really clear.
I would
And
love
that empowers staff before we get to tonight. To have a meeting with or a phone call with an applicant to say, look, I understand you don't want to do that. And you want to go to the city council or P and Z commission and ask for a deviation or waiver or limitation. But
You need to ask for a reason.
So, I mean, it might be that we have a lot more consent agenda items because we know you've already worked with the applicant. We don't have flexibility. And I think, you know, over the years, I think we've probably developed a reputation, maybe it's earned, where we think we have a lot of flexibility where we probably shouldn't be.
Because it's hard to remember all the various cross references that tie our hands, right?
Oh.
Unless.
We always decide we have.
some of us some of us that even been here a very long time, haven't seen them or don't know what they are. And so we just,
I think that would really be nice if we could just put in the code, and even if we could cross-reference the actual codes, zoning code section, that would be great. This is set by, you know, zoning code section, whatever. And I completely agree with Matt. I think it's gonna cut down on a lot of chatter, because they'll just be told, look, you can talk to blue in the face, but unless the commission is doing something unlawful, they should not be waiving this because they can't waive it. And that should cut off a lot of.
Jen's heard me talk for 20 years about applicants who come in here and they ask for a variance. And a variance isn't something you see. Like, if you look at the legal definition of the variance, it's there's a tree there, so I can't do what, there's some hardship on the property that doesn't allow the code to be followed. That's what a variance is. It's always like, they just don't want to do it. So I'm asking for a variance. And So, I mean, I think having a clear
Clear
list of
definition.
what is. Wait a minute.
So do we even need to talk about the difference between the residential versus other CUPs and?
Do you like the 50% for residential, or do you want to keep that in, take that out?
Are we allowed to waive it?
Well, I think if you
That-
do-
that's
I
the
think if you do,
potential.
then have a rephrasing. I think you should phrase as residential and density is increased by no more than 50% of what is a zone. I
That is
think
much
that
clearer.
is clear.
So you're saying to do it,
But we can
but
also
just
cut it completely.
clean up the wording, clean up, you're saying leave it there.
Yeah, that's just the cleanup on the
Word
word,
is
whether you
different.
cut it now or not.
That word's a
At
different.
least uncaffeinated people can understand it now.
So we're asking for more density in that finding?
No, it creates a max.
It's a cap.
So somebody can't come in and say, I want unlimited
Right.
density.
I mean, I guess, have we ever, that's a lot of density. I don't know if do we want to tie our hands? I guess it's a question.
No, I think 50.
Seems fair.
I don't think that you have an objective, non-subjective way you'll decide. Whether it's 40, 50, 60, then given that, if I'm correct, then 50% is about as good as we're gonna come up with.
And if it's in there, then it's yet another thing we can just tell people it's in the code.
Well, that's correct. I think that we need to have something like that. And I don't think that among us, we have an objective way of deciding what should differ from 50%.
Well, it would be based on the underlying code. So if you're in an R2, you'd be maxing out the density, which is a calculable above.
Right.
Get 9 units.
But I think what you're saying is, how do we ever deviate? How is it not always 50% more than, they're always gonna want maximum density, right? So are you saying, how do we ever deviate down now that we put that number in there?
They might not, but at least it gives them a maximum.
It's something.
I think it's fine.
I'm fine with it too.
The one thing that I'd like to potentially caution on that is, we had if we all go to the application that came through as a specific area plan, if that were to have come through as a plan unit development, I don't know that it could, I'm fairly certain it could not have gone through with that provision on the plantation, or on the River Club golf course area.
Which will be back on your desk, so we shouldn't talk about it too much. Since it's gonna be
That's
looking
correct.
at the
They-
new
They
PUD on
put
it.
that application in.
They've changed their
Um,
mind.
And so that has been discussed. I am discussing the specific area plan and PUD, not pending applications when I talk about this.
For the record. yes.
For the
Just
record.
An example of where the code might
Mhm.
cause tension we don't want.
Where it has been suggested, why did that come through as a specific area plan and not a plan unit development? It would have been precluded under that, under this, as drafted, just because of that, increase. So that may be what you want.
Let me make a comment. So if you have that situation that came up, maybe it ought to be that way, and which would require, maybe you have to have another specific area plan if it's that kind of a development.
Mhm.
Which it said that there isn't anything wrong with this. Okay, it just says that that's the way you solve that issue.
If something's so out of the ordinary, it just requires. a
Yeah,
special process.
it would have to have them, it would have to come in and have another specific area plan.
To further complicate the discussion as we think through things, I also want to point out that the comprehensive plan has the transit oriented development nodes that specifically talk about having higher densities. And we have not to date rezoned or developed a zoning ordinance for those. Not suggesting that we
This-
need to address it here.
This is higher though. It's just higher, capital 50%.
Mhm. For sure. So I think I'm hearing leave it in at least Leave it in. Okay,
Easier to cut it later than to remember to add it back in, so
Yeah.
say at least for now, leave it. And see if Mr. Wadham slaps it
Yeah.
eventually.
Where's my red pen?
and
Oh, I'm sorry. Going back to G and the note to reader, it says finding H is new.
do you know, and that's a typo, and I tried to figure out what the author was talking about on GNH, and I think it is only 8. However, I also did want to point out number 2. When I met with legal staff, that was when they wanted to look at and provide their opinion on the best wording on how to bring in compatibility with the comp plan, or if they even wanted it, if they would suggest to take it out completely. Speaking of typos, the word in the wording in the ordinance on page 19, all talks to 3, that's what current code says, that's what we've talked about, but the note to reader says 5 dwellings, and so that is just another typo. Somebody obviously did not have their coffee when they were drafting the notes to readers.
I really like the notes to readers. They're super helpful.
Good.
Despite the typos, I think they're awesome. This is a really great staff report.
Thank you.
I think it's great. Makes it really clear, easy to understand.
So instead of 5, it should say 3. The
It should,
typo is the 5, not the.
correct. Provided that that's what the commission would like it to say. And with that, those are the changes that I wanted to highlight. And certainly would appreciate any discussion that you'd like to have.
Yeah, I have actually, since we're on right there where we were just looking at that typo in that note to reader box. So 1A, developments with 3 to 15 dwelling units should provide this amount, and then each additional 15 should provide additional 10, presumably per 15. But then it says developments over 30 should have an amenity from each of the 3 categories. So like at what point does the additional 15? Like you have 3 to 15, and then an additional 15 is 30. But then, sorry, maybe my math is like.
And this, I think questions are wonderful because it helps us look at the language ahead of time.
Yeah, I'm just not sure when it says like each additional 15, because eventually you're gonna get up to that over 30. And then which.
And that the intent is that once you hit that 30, you have to pick from different categories. And then this is something else I wanted to point out at the previous work session. So there's 2 things there. We had talked about not having point systems. However, this is code that's outside of the PUD and may be addressed by staff. It may be a strictly administrative matter. And in meeting with development services staff, they said they want the points because it's nice and clean and clear and they can just administer those points. We certainly can rework that and try to figure out a different matrix to be able to determine big, little, and small and how to get those together. And because we did specifically talk about not having point systems, and I do recognize you're seeing new point systems. And so that would be a point of discussion. And then to go back to Commissioner Shepard's question, the intent is that that the different categories would be addressed after 30 or more units. And currently under multifamily, that's how it works. The larger your development, the more categories you have to pick, have to incorporate.
With the points, can you double them up? Like if I have 10 gazebos, is that 100 points? Or does any amount of gazebos only get you 10?
Yeah, really.
Would you like that clarified as no doubling up?
Because it kind of, it implies that just the presence of this thing gets you 10 points, but I could imagine a developer being like, well, I'm just gonna build a ton of gazebos.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Put them all kinds of gazebos, huh?
So maybe we say the presence of any amount, you only get 10 points for your gazebos, no matter how many you have, or something.
Or it could also
Parenthesis
count
S on
as
every-
outdoor living room space under the first section.
And maybe we want to give more credit for more gazebos, I don't know, but maybe just something to think about in how people are gonna do their math.
Seems like we had quite a discussion about these point systems. Last time, didn't we? I'm remembering you asking a really good question. About something on the.
It was the transit.
Yeah, about getting a transit pass and covering all your points.
Exactly.
I mean, I just think the staff, I know it seems easier to just add up points, but I don't think it will be easier.
Okay.
And I think it will create a lot of developer manipulation, to a point where it's defeating the purpose. I mean, now maybe you could frame it, explain it, lock it down in a way that prevents that.
Mhm.
But I think the way I don't think we're gonna like the way they get to their points.
One thing that I was thinking is they could all be put in a matrix. A, amenities, B amenities, C amenities, and then say you have to have at least 3A
From
or
this
an A and a
category,
B
from
or an A and a C, and that
Yeah, I
gets rid
like
of the
that.
C.
I think that's a
Okay.
good compromise. I like that a lot. It's still a little bit mathematical, but it's not. It prevents the odd combinations
Mhm.
because
Okay.
they're forced into categories, yeah. I could do it. Pretty easily. No. Any of us are lawyers, we're like, no numbers. We don't want numbers.
Okay. It is scheduled for hearing in, I guess, 3 weeks now, since we have a later meeting. If when it comes, you can certainly, if it's not ready for a hearing, you could continue it again. But just, there's the status.
All right, so we're planning on the hearing next
In April.
in April.
What Jen is saying is when we see this fixed up and Charles is gonna look at it and redline it for us, right? And when we see the product of all of that, we'll make a collective decision about whether we want to count it as a hearing.
But we're gonna notice it as the hearing. So
It has been noticed.
Yeah.
This particular one doesn't seem to be getting much public traction. And so I don't think it would, it should. So I suspect nobody would be heartbroken if you continued the hearing. And also hopefully Mr. Wadhams has gotten most of his red lines to us.
This is really great work. Thank you. This is a huge lift.
Bottoms, are we planning on seeing any of the others that you're working on come back through next month?
Chairman, the other one is buffers, and I know the mayor and Jenna were gonna meet on that. I have some concerns in buffers. And so I don't know if the preference is gonna be a remand or try to work it through on the city council level, so I'm not sure.
Okay. Sounds
Maybe,
good.
maybe Jenna knows more than I do. I haven't had a chance. Since Jenna's been back in the office, I haven't had a chance to sit down with her yet.
I haven't been back long. The issue is actually an issue that came up post the Planning and Zoning Commission recommendation that I'm not quite sure how City Council is going to address that. And that is the commission had recommended not having a transition a zone between zoning districts, bless you. And that worked itself into the current code that's gone through hearing. So there are issues with that that I don't know how the city council will address.
The main issue I have is, generally in Idaho, I would say that you cannot rezone your neighbor's property without their consent unless you're the government. The way it's written right now, it says you can rezone your neighbor's property without their consent, arguably. And that's not a good thing from a legal standpoint.
Affect their height.
We should probably, yeah. Because it says if you're adjacent to, well, R2 or the medium density zone, then you can rezone your property, and then they're gonna have height restrictions and stuff, whether they consent to it or not.
Oh,
And I think that is a problem.
However, my hunch is it will not get remanded because this commission did not make the recommendation for that. That all occurred at discussions with city council. So I would suspect if they take it back out, they've taken back out their own.
And then the
Direction.
council didn't realize that half the ordinance applied citywide, like additional regs for water, waterways and stuff like that. Now everybody understands it applies citywide, but that's another issue we're working through.
All right, is there anything else to discuss tonight? All right, hearing none, then we will call the meeting adjourned. Thank you all very much. Appreciate it.